because I have a team now that manages everything. And I'm going, yes.
That's wonderful.
I
That
have
is.
to learn all this.
Yeah. All right, well, we got to get started. So thank you very much. All right, everyone. So please find your seats. It's time to get going. So thank you all so much for being here. A workshop on, well, giving and financial planning isn't always what everyone is interested in, but it is a very important thing. And these weeks we've been talking about money matters and how that is part of our discipleship in obedience to Jesus is how we use our money. So I'm really excited for this little workshop. Most of you already know Matthew Burns, one of our Thrivent representatives. So I have asked him to put a workshop together that can focus on some things, different ways that people give to the church, especially things like legacy giving. And I've kind of let him have mostly a free rein. I've given kind of a loose direction, but he knows way more than I do in these matters. And so he's going to give us a brief presentation. There's going to be time for questions at the end. And you may have noticed he's actually here every month. He's here generally on the second Sunday of the month. He's available. Usually he has donut holes, which we always appreciate. But if you ever have a question about anything financial, talk to him. See what he has to say. And of course, we work with Thrivent a lot. They've got all sorts of wonderful ways, things that we use, financial matter things. So please feel free to talk to him and his dad. You might know him also, Rob Burns. He's around also. So both of them are a wonderful resource for this church, and they are happy to serve. So thank you again very much, Matthew. We really appreciate it. And let's give him a round of applause, and we'll turn it over to him.
Hello, everybody. To those in the back, I will do my best to remember theater how I project. So hopefully you can hear me and all goes well.
You don't have a microphone?
I do not have a microphone.
Well,
It's okay.
now you do have a microphone.
Cool. All right. We're doing live tech swaps.
Did you do theater?
I did do theater.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
All right.
For 4 years.
Whoa. All
I
right.
know. All right. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Excellent. Well, thanks, Pastor Eric, for the warm introduction. As mentioned, my name is Matthew Burns. I work for Thrivent Financial. I've been doing this for about 5 years now. My dad, Rob Burns, who some of you might know, has been doing this for over 24 years, and we've been really blessed to be a part of this community for that time and just been very gracious with your time and conversations throughout the years, so very much appreciate it. A funny part about only doing this for coming up on 5 years is it's all been in COVID, so you are officially the largest people I've talked to not on Zoom about this kind of thing. I'm sure this will go great without a second monitor to look at notes for, so we're gonna kill it. It's gonna be great. What we're here to talk about today, like Pastor Eric mentioned, is you've been talking about what we're doing on your day-to-day for giving and how the church and finances work. But today we want to touch a little bit on matters of your estate planning. Now, when someone mentions an estate plan, you might picture a few different things. We live in California, so you're probably picturing something in Malibu with a large garden, a car from a sports car magazine, and some other things. And that's one definition. But really, we all have an estate. An estate is simply, by definition, everything that you own. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're establishing a plan to make sure that it is protected and that there are guardrails up to make sure that there are guardrails up to protect that and ensure that what happens with it after your passing is what you wish it happens. So for the next 30 or so minutes, we're going to kind of go through and define what that is, define what documents make up an estate plan, and some ways that you can benefit your family and your church and make sure that you have a plan in place for all the contingencies of life, which are many. So the first thing we want to talk about are assets. Or did we skip a slide? Oh, there we are. So there's a few things we want to talk about today. The first is assets. These are what make up your estate. This can be financial or it can be physical. The next thing we're going to talk about are going to be your beneficiaries. This will be everything from the people in your family and in your life to the churches and charities that you are involved with and that are most important to you. The next thing that we're going to go through is going to be the documents that actually make up your estate. So it's not just one estate document, it's actually 4 different documents: your will, your trust, your powers of attorney for healthcare, and your powers of attorney for medical, sometimes called your healthcare directive. Then we're going to go through a few of the choices that you'll have in conversations regarding what will happen after your passing and how you have some control over that. And then finally, some resources that we want to make available to you to close things out. So to start off, we want to talk about assets. And when you think of the word asset, you think of a few different things. Potentially, you might be thinking of your 401k, you might be thinking of your home, you might be thinking of your wedding ring, and these are all falling into assets, but they don't primarily need to be financial, and it's a critical first step in defining what you need as part of this entire estate, as not everyone's is the same, and everyone has a unique strategy. Not everyone needs the same solutions. So what we put in those buckets is as important as anything, as what documents you put into place. So to kind of give a story, if you're thinking about assets, this could be that aren't financial. This could be a fishing pole that your granddad won his small town fishing competition in 50 years ago that you wanted to keep. This could be a cookbook of family recipes that you've built up throughout the years and you're passing down. Or in my family's case, it's a picture. And growing up, we're a game family. I don't know how many of you are out there. We played board games inside. We played football and tag inside. And if you ever needed to make a single decision, you were most likely challenged to a game of rock, paper, scissors. This was done almost every day. None of us could decide anything. So we thought, how can we do this in a way that is fun and conducive to our relationships? And we probably wasn't thought out that well when we were teenagers, but we played rock, paper, scissors. And my parents loved it, to the point where one day my dad came home with this giant portrait of a rock hand, a paper hand, and a scissor hand. It was yellow and blue on a white background. It is gigantic, and it lived in our hallway for many, many years. And to the point where each of us who saw that picture at one point or other said, you know, I want that picture. I don't know when I want it, and I don't know when I'm going to own a home, but I want that picture. And I'm sure at one point my parents have promised us to each of us. So at some point, hopefully far, far in the future, there's going to be a conversation where we're sitting at a table and we've gone through all of the financial assets and we've gone through all of, you're seeing where this is going, and we're going through all the financial assets and we've figured out what all they've put out in their documentation. And if they haven't put it in writing, we're going to get to the picture. And we're going to have to sit down and we're going to have to say, you know, there's probably going to be hurt feelings. We're all very tight to this, but we have to figure out who gets this picture. And if they haven't written it down, we're probably going to play rock, paper, scissors for it. And I think all of you could probably come up with a few things that fit that criteria, things that aren't financial, but are physical and simply memorable for your family. And if you have a piece of paper or it's just in your head, maybe take just a few seconds and think of maybe 5 or so things that would fit in that bubble. It could be a picture, that fishing pole, it's something that's just memorable to you and your family, but it might not be where you've thought that there should be something that is in writing where it passes down to someone who cares about it. And what you'll do, because that list will end up being more than 5 things, is you're going to take that list with you to an attorney. And that attorney is going to look at that and say, this compromises your estate, and let's go ahead and let's put the guardrails in place to make sure that what you have is written down, and we have a document that says what is going to happen to it. And no matter the size of your estate, there should always be documents in place, and having a will and designating those beneficiaries is vital to making sure that your wishes are respected. And there are some assets that aren't pictures and that do have rules in place to make sure that those are already designating where they're going. And these are called transfer on death accounts. Oftentimes, for those of you who have mutual funds or brokerage accounts, these already have what's called a transfer on death registration. And you can name individuals, you can name charities, you can name churches, and you can have that in place already outside of your separate estate designations. But this includes your retirement accounts, this includes life insurances, this includes investment accounts. And that's a nice, clean way to get it set up. But one thing you don't want to do, and that I've had unfortunately to deal with in the past, is you want to make sure you're reviewing it. Every few years, life changes, and something that you established at your work 401k 20, 40 years ago and your work has changed 401k companies multiple times, and your HR department tells you, yeah, we just cloned everything and it's going to be over, everything's totally fine, only to find that they didn't move over your beneficiaries correctly, or they moved over an older edition. These things are living documents, and much like everything else, needs review. And it's kind of a great time to be talking about this. We have Thanksgiving coming up. You're going to be setting a table with your family. You might have a relative who's filling up whether it be a water pitcher, where it could be porcelain, it could be glass, but they're sitting in the center of the table, and they just make a passing comment that says, this is my favorite thing that we do at Thanksgiving. We use this same table setting, and this piece this has a memory to me, or something like this, and looking at them and saying, I would love for, if something happens to me, that you have that. And it doesn't have to be a big conversation, but it has to be a conversation. And just like everything else we're doing today, the most important is you don't want next Thanksgiving to have a different relative say that, and you promise it to them, so you should probably write it down. And to get technical, any kind of those transfers that occur are, whether it be gifting or gifting during your life or gifting during your passing, is some variation of transfer. If it happens during your life, it's simply called a lifetime transfer. There are rules for how much in monetary value you can gift during your life on a yearly and a lifetime basis. And then after your passing, it's called a testamentary transfer. And there are rules for that as well. And anytime you do a transfer, there could potentially be a tax impact. So while I today am not licensed to give you legal advice or tax advice, we can give you legal and tax information, but I would always recommend speaking with an attorney or a CPA to make sure, and your advisor, to make sure that we're doing the best things possible to ensure that your inheritors receive the most out of their inheritance. So we've talked a little bit about why it's important and kind of how we can pass things along, but how do we actually ensure that we're efficiently passing these through? So this is where we start getting into the documents that I mentioned earlier, and all of this is to simply answer the question, if I am not able to care for myself and my assets, who can? If I'm not able to make my own decisions, or if I have passed and someone has to take care of it, who's supposed to do that? And the first document that we put in place that I mentioned is a will. A will, very simply put, allows you to provide detailed instructions to distribute your property to your heirs. It allows you to establish an executor, or sometimes called a settlor, who would be in charge of making the decisions to not only manage your assets while they are controlling them, but also eventually distribute them according to your wishes, and as well as also lets you establish a guardian or a protector for a guardian or a custodian for a minor child that you might be the parent or the guardian of already, or someone who is a dependent of yourself. So kind of just show of hands, who already has a will in place? Fantastic ratio. Who has a will but probably needs to update it? A similar ratio. And then the rest of you don't have a will. And so you guys are, I can promise you, beating the national average in terms of people who have a will, who need a will, or just estate documents. I think the statistic is something along the lines of 60% of people who need these documents do not have it. So it's nice to see how many of us do, but also there's hands that don't, and it's probably relevant if you've lived this far in life that you have those documents in place. And one thing we're going to touch on briefly is the part about the dependents and the minor child. Some of you might be caring for parents. Some of you might be caring for, be guardians for children or have children. And setting up rules in place to where they're cared for is an important part of what these are supposed to represent. And as part of that, you're in charge of selecting who that guardian would be. And this is simply another transfer conversation. You might be naming a sibling of yours who lives incredibly nearby. There might be a cousin who lives slightly farther away, but aligns more closely with your values. You might have someone you knew back in college who's the same age as you, who has children who are the same age as your children, or you might have the godparents of your child. All of these people are potentially the ones who would care for your child if something were to happen to you. And so talking with your partner about who you would name as their guardian, and talking to those people that you might potentially be naming so that they're aware of it, is just as important. I don't know who's seen, I don't know who's seen the movie Knives Out. Came out a few years ago, but there's that great scene where they all get in the boardroom and they read a will, and they all gasp when they have named the nurse. Spoilers, for those of you who haven't, please cover your ears. They named the nurse as the beneficiary for everything. It makes for great watching and probably the most miserable real-life experience I can possibly imagine. So probably do not want that to be us and our children. So a will defines some of the rules that are in place to control your inheritance, but it doesn't control or stop everything. Does everyone know what probate is? Show of hands, people who know what probate is? In California, it's a very prevalent issue. We have a very strict process when it comes to this. It's hard to throw a rock and not hit someone who has a terrible story about how they spent over a year and tens of thousands of dollars clearing a house through probate when there was a will in place already that said it's supposed to go to them, but they still had to do it. At probate, it's not some process if you don't have these documents. All of us will go through some measure of probate when we pass. It's simply the legal process of passing, filing that final tax return, filing anything with government entities, but sometimes it's more involved with others, and it causes issues and costs. So one of the ways that we can reduce that is with the second document, the complementary document, which is the revocable living trust. A trust is simply a document that can control assets while you're alive. So you can be the owner of the trust while you're living, put entities like your house and your accounts into the trust, and when upon your passing, because it's into the name of your trust, it bypasses that probate process. And when you hear trust, you might think of trust fund, and you might think of children's trusts. There are many different kinds, but the revocable living trust is specifically what you'll have in place to control those assets. So a few situations where it's useful, like I mentioned. If you want the privacy for your assets and for the simplification for your beneficiaries, this is an excellent place where we bypass that probate. If you have providing for a child with special needs, or where you're protecting a dependent who provides additional care after your passing. If you were to be unable to handle your personal affairs, having assets in the name of your trust allows whoever your successor trustee would be, whether it be your partner or your children or a third party, they could step in and represent you and represent your trust with those companies. And finally, for kind of the focus of this month, if you have a complex beneficiary structure, you might have a mixed family with children from multiple marriages that you want to make sure are treated equally or equitably. You might have nephews and grandnephews or aunts and uncles or cousins that you want to provide a measure of inheritance for, or you want to leave money to churches and charities that are important to you. If you are regularly tithing and you said, as part of my passing, I want to leave a representative tithe to a church or a charity that I volunteer with, a trust is where that documentation can be laid out. And to give you an example, this is a stock photo of people I've named Carl and Cora. They have 3 children. They're not extraordinarily wealthy. One of their children have special needs. The other 2 children are financially secure. They have their home, they have a bank account, but they don't have much else. And they go to an attorney and they lay out that they want to provide for their child that needs extra care after their passing. They want to ensure that their other 2 children are taken care of, and they want to leave a measure behind to the church that they're actively participating in that community. And the attorney looks at them and says, you are the exact people who need a trust, and this is an excellent time for you to come talk to me. They'll go through what assets can go into a trust. I've kind of reviewed this. You can put real estate in a trust, you can put your bank accounts in a trust, and you can put investment accounts in a trust. And when we say in a trust, it's not just putting in your trust that the home is a part of it. The trust actually becomes an owner of that asset. So even once you establish the documentation, there is still follow-through that the attorney and that you will need to go through to ensure that those things match. And since it's not subject to probate, we save on some of those costs upon the passing, which is really one of the main benefits of doing this. As part of that, there are still some upfront costs. The attorney who actually structures the language of the trust and files the documentation and would be in charge of retitling your home in the name of the trust, There are costs associated there. So speaking with an advisor or an attorney to see if it is the right tool for you is important. If you're a homeowner in California, I've got great news. I can let you know without giving legal advice that it is probably the right tool for you. In addition to that, you'll want to meet with people who you would want to establish as your successor trustee. Like I said, this will be yourself and your partner as the primary trustees, but you would want to potentially be naming your children or an uncle. But there are some questions that arise ahead of that. Number one, do they have a prudence that you align with? Do you believe that they would make wise financial decisions, as in advance of distributing the money, there will be a period where they have to actually manage those funds? Second is experience. You might know someone who's been a trustee already or an executor of an estate. And if they came to you and they didn't say, that was the most harrowing experience of my life, I never want to do this again, maybe they're a good fit. And the third is time. It's not a fast process. They will be managing those assets while mid-distribution. Sometimes it's fast, sometimes it is very extended. The longest that I've had is still ongoing, and it's going on like 2 years. But I will say most are much shorter. But you might want to find someone who has time to spare to be able to meet those requirements on what is necessary. And in addition, the person or company that you name as your successor trustee is going to have to be interacting with all of your various beneficiaries. So having someone who can handle the interpersonal connections and conversations that arise from that is just as important as being able to handle the financial matters. The final two documentations is your powers of attorney. And there's two powers of attorney. There's your power of attorney for financial, and there's your power of attorney for healthcare. That is sometimes called your healthcare directive. They're both very similar. They both allow you to establish a person or persons to manage that slice of responsibility. These can be the same people for both, or it can be different people. Sometimes it's good to have them be the same person so that the person making your healthcare decisions can also pull the money to pay for it. But sometimes you want it separate based on temperament or based on availability. The slice that the durable power of attorney for financial is in charge of ensuring that if you are unable to request money, pay your bills, take care of your day-to-day spending, or pay for care, and you either have diminished mental capacity, you can't talk on the phone, you have an illness that prevents you from being able to interact in the measure that you do, your power of attorney can step in and can pay your bills and can ensure that you and your assets are taken care of. On the flip side, your healthcare directive is in charge of your care. And these are incredibly personal questions. Questions such as, do you want a feeding tube? Do you not want a feeding tube? Do you want pain medication or no pain medication? Would you like a ventilator or no ventilator? There's no individual or catch-all answer for anyone. Everyone is going to have a different answer in a different situation, which is why it's important that not only do you talk about that with your attorney when you're setting it up, making sure it stays updated if your mindset changes throughout your life, but also communicating that with the person that you name as your power of attorney. Through all of the things that we're talking about today, conversation is key to all of it. And especially you don't want whoever's your healthcare power of attorney, when there's a health event, to come to a hospital, get your document, and flip through it, and as they're telling the doctor what your wishes are, them learning it at the same time. That's a traumatic time to be processing that, and that giving that the time to breathe and converse is incredibly important. Finally, you will also be making some decisions for after you pass. There is how you want your funeral to be arranged. Who do you want to be there? All of those kind of personal decisions, similar to your healthcare directive, are unique to you, and some people are going to give more thought to it than others. To bring one last real fake couple in here, Carl and Cora had a child named Sue, and Sue got married to a man named Dennis. And while they're incredibly alike in most aspects, in their final planning preparations, they are incredibly different. Sue wants her college and high school band that she played in to perform at her funeral. She knows what flowers she wants. She knows what music she wants played. She knows what church she wants it held at. And she knows even how long she wants the ceremony to go on for. Dennis really doesn't care. Dennis wants a simple cremation. He wants a small gathering of family and friends, and that's it. But they do agree on a few things. They bought a burial plot next to her parents. I killed off Carl and Cora. They've both bought a small life insurance policy. so that their each final expenses are taken care of. And they've had the conversation with their son about their wishes. All of this is just things that we can do to deepen relationships with the people that we care about, and so that there's not surprises when we pass and that your wishes are respected. And we've gone through a lot today, and we're going to have some Q&A after this where I'll be able to answer questions. But as part of this, we wanted to pass along a few resources. Number one, a lot of you raised your hand and said you had wills and trusts in place, which is fantastic, which means you are already working with an attorney or have worked with an attorney in the past. But for those of you who don't have an attorney and want to maybe broach this conversation with your partner and have someone to call to, we have cards on the table out back for Alex Varela. She's an attorney over in Placentia. She does an excellent job, has a lot of staff on hand, and we have a couple of her cards that we'd be happy to pass out. In addition, if you called our office and said, she's not a good fit, I would like, do you have any other recommendations? We keep 4 or so attorneys in rotation to be able to refer to in case you have questions or would like to meet with one. Second off, if you'd like to meet with us to go through and say, hey, I don't have a trust in a will, or I'd like to see if I'm suitable for one or both, or I have one but I'd like to make updates and my attorney has retired or is out of the area or is just not taking my call, we'd love to sit down and have a conversation with you, in which case my card is out back as well. Finally, Thrivent does have a estate planning guide. It's a document that kind of walks through some of what I've chatted about today, and it provides some resources and kind of questions to pose as you're starting this journey of getting this together. If you'd like a copy, there is a sign-in sheet. Thrivent wants to make sure that today I didn't talk to an empty room. So if at least some of you wouldn't mind putting your name and email down, and if you would like the document, you can put a star next to your name or email, and I'll ensure that a copy of that or how to access that gets emailed to you. Finally, I believe that is all the things that I was going to cover today. So I'd love to open it up the floor to questions that anyone might have regarding this or anything else on their mind about this today. Yes?
If I have some money that I want to invest so that I can designate the church as the beneficiary, do I come to you with that, and what kind of a vessel do you put that in?
Yeah. So if you have assets that you want to leave to the church in your passing, we would do a couple of things. If you have a trust in place already that establishes that a portion of the proceeds are going to the church, then we could make an account in the name of your trust. And in that case, the vessel itself would be any sort of investment account that fits the kind of the profile and aspects that you're looking for. Our office has multiple different options available, and if you work with another advisor or anyone in the room, they'll have their own options available for that as well. But say you didn't have it in your trust, or you wanted to designate a slice that specifically goes to the church outside of the rest of your trust planning, we would do, I'm not going to flip back to the slide, but we would establish an account that has the transfer on death registration. We have all the same account options, from investment accounts to life insurances to mutual funds, but you would actually name Christ Lutheran as the specific designated beneficiary. And that as well, all accounts with a specific beneficiary also bypass probate. Because it's not left to your estate, you've left it to an individual person, so there's no need to file that. And again, legal information, not legal advice. That does not get filed in the same manner as it goes specifically to Christ Lutheran. So that's how you would accomplish that. It would just be either part of the trust or the designated beneficiary.
What if it's a vessel that has an annuity based on it? So can you designate a fund that stays there but grows?
Absolutely. And that's where we would move the funds into an annuity or a brokerage account where it's invested in the market, or a life insurance policy if that fits the solution better. That's kind of a deeper conversation of what is the bucket you're looking at leaving and how can we best optimize that for the years until the church would be the recipient of it. And that's just where we would have an appointment and review that.
So on my death, the church would be the recipient of the whole?
Correct. For anything that you have labeled the church as the transfer on death beneficiary, the church will receive directly. including any portion that's grown. Yes?
Can you have more than one power of attorney?
Great question. And yes, you can. With both powers of attorney and for trustees, you are not limited to one person. You can name a company. There are professional companies that do this. And even there, they'll have internals like a council. You're not assigned one person, you're assigned a council of people. But in your own personal life, you can say, I would like all of my children or all of my siblings to be the trustees or the power of attorney. That comes with pros and cons. The pro of that is you have more people available for answering questions and handling issues as they arise. The con is that sometimes when it comes to power of attorney specifically, trustee, sometimes they can act independently and with assets a little bit easier. Powers of attorney, because there are questions that maybe some of your power of attorneys are okay with the fact that you didn't want a feeding tube, or you didn't want to be resuscitated, or you did want a feeding tube. And some of them won't be okay. If all the power of attorneys do not agree when there are multiple acting in tandem, that can cause friction because you needed that unanimous answer to be passed along to the doctor advising their care. So that's where sometimes people will name one attorney for power of healthcare with backups, and they'll name a different power of attorney for financial. That way they're working together, but the person who they believe will respect their healthcare wishes will properly respect their healthcare wishes. It can be a complicated interpersonal conversation.
Okay, I have a couple of farms in Kansas, and my sharecropper lives on one of those properties, and he knows more about farming than I do. And so he has my power of attorney as far as those farms are concerned.
Okay.
But I wouldn't want him to have power of attorney over my other assets. So is that okay?
You would work with an attorney to make sure that designation is put into place. So there should be rules in place, and frankly, what you might even end up doing, and what your attorney might suggest, is that the farm is put into trust and might already be in trust, and that farmer becomes the successor trustee while you are alive. And in that instance, or co-trustee with you while you're alive. And then when upon your incapacitation, he can continue being the trustee, and upon your passing, there can be language put into place that allows it to go to who you would want to actually be in charge of distributing the farm and managing who it passes on to. That might not be done with the power of attorney, but when it comes to those really deep in the weeds variations, that's up to an attorney to decide if you can get what's called a special power of attorney for those individual use cases as well. So if it's not in the trust, they might establish a special power of attorney just for the farm, but I would definitely ask them about that. But it would be separate from the rest of your assets.
Might be easier if I sell it to his son who wants to buy it.
Yes?
Question on probate. I thought that was, you had to go through probate if you had no will or if your estate was over a certain amount.
Great question. So, and that's where for all these documentations, we always recommend you talk with either an advisor or an attorney to see if it's suitable for you. For some people, if you don't own real estate and your assets currently under California regulation are under 180,000, don't quote me on that number, it changes every year, you're what's called a small estate. In which case your beneficiaries would file what's called a small estate affidavit with any entity that holds part of your assets. They would approach your bank with a small estate affidavit and say, the total estate value is under a certain amount, so I am filing this as a small estate. That does bypass formal probate. It is a notarized document, but you don't have to go to the courts for it. But if you own any kind of real estate, even if it's low value, and that's just in your name, that will go through probate. And if your assets are over that 180,000, you will also be going through probate.
Have those rules changed? Because I don't remember probate. True, that was back in the 70s.
They continuously change. So the value that a small estate is changes every year, and California has stricter regulations now to where homes, if they're not named in trust, will go through probate. Yeah. Yes?
What's the role of the CPA in all this?
CPA is an excellent part of the overall team. Their job is really to make sure that anything that you're doing, any of those transfers, whether you're living or whether you're past, are being done in a way that is most optimal for yourself and your beneficiaries from a tax standpoint. So if you're looking at passing on a farm that you have in Kansas, they might look at that and go, well, that we have to balance the Kansas estate tax limit, which might be lower than California's. California, we have the federal estate tax limit of, right now it's 12.9 million per person. They're talking about lowering that in the next couple of years, so your CPA would be monitoring that. But in other states like Oregon, it's 1 million per person. So it varies based on what state and where you're interacting in. And if you're passing on inheritance while you're alive, your CPA would be in charge of making sure that, number one, you're not passing over that gift tax limit every year. Because while you have a lifetime gift tax, if you were to ever gift per person per year, it's $18,000 per beneficiary. If you were to gift someone living $18,001, your CPA is in charge of recording that and filing that, and that $1 would go against your testamentary transfer limit. So they are someone who you would refer to. They're not in charge of the actual documentation themselves, but they would be for questions of how can we best optimize that transfer, and that's a conversation to have with your CPA or your advisor. Yes?
I have a different type question. What if somebody wants to set up their monthly contribution from one of their traditional IRAs?
Yeah. So great part about that. For those of us in the room, I have gray hair, so I'm counting myself in spirit, who are over 70 and a half. You have access to gift from your IRAs via qualified charitable distribution. For inherited IRAs, those rules are a little bit different. I believe you still have to be over 70 and a half. But for those IRAs, you are able to send the money directly to the church, and you do not pay taxes on it. The age of QCDs at 70 and a half used to be the age for RMDs. The age for RMDs is currently 73. So for ages 70 and a half to 73, the nice part about that is it's simply saving you after-tax dollars, and you're lowering your eventual lifetime taxable withdrawals because you're not going to have to pull out as much in retirement. And then after the RMD age, the nice part about that is the gifting is reducing the amount of RMD you have to take. So if you have $15,000 of RMD to take out per year, and you're planning on gifting $15,000 to the church, you have satisfied your RMD, and you don't pay any taxes on it. The church doesn't pay any taxes on it. It's an incredibly efficient manner to gift to the church and save you in the after-tax dollars you would have donated already.
How do you get that started? Do you start with your investment people or with the church? What information?
Yeah, so for that, you would start with your investment advisor. So if you work with like a Charles Schwab or a Thrivent or anything, you would give them a call and you would say, hey, I want to establish a monthly, an annual, a semi-annual distribution, a qualified charitable distribution to Christ Lutheran. And they'll probably have you sign a form. And what they'll do is they'll just set it up monthly where they're going to have a check mailed to Christ Lutheran for that amount. Traditionally, those are not done via direct deposit, at least at Thrivent. Other companies might be different. We have to mail a check per my legal department, but that's how we process it. And it's very, very simple to do, and it is usually just one form, and you give them the information of how much you want to donate, on what basis you want to, and where that'll come from, and they'll take care of the rest. Yeah. Yes, I'll get to you next.
I was told that if you put your car in your trust,
Mm-hmm.
and you have an automobile accident,
Mm-hmm.
and the person that was involved in the accident sees that the car is in a trust,
Mm-hmm.
they will most likely go into a large lawsuit. Do you have any comments on that?
So I absolutely do have comments. I have to start with my disclaimer, which I'm sure you're all tired of I give legal information, not legal advice. If Rob were here, he would hit me if I didn't say that. But that it might be more of an indicator to them that there are more assets. So they might make a greater, that gets kind of into more of the psychology of it. They might get into a greater mindset of, oh, this car is in trust, so I will push through with a lawsuit that I might not have before. But having a trust, having it just in your name, number one, does not prevent them from going after assets that are in trust. So if your car is in your name personally, and your home and your bank account are in the name of your trust, of your living trust, if they sue you for an accident here, they can still come after your living trust here. What they would not be able to come after is if you establish what is called an irrevocable trust. Those are assets that are set aside in a separate trust vehicle that the key being you do not have ownership of. The irrevocable trust has ownership of. So, while it is a tool of protection, it is also a very limiting tool to where it frankly might not be worth simply carrying a greater degree of insurance. Because you do not have access to pull money out except in special circumstances like pulling out income or redistributing to a different vehicle for the irrevocable trust. So a basic living trust that is useful for 99% of people does not protect against people coming after it, even if they're involved in things that aren't in trust. And I think there was one last question there.
Do you have attorneys that you can suggest? Do you have CPAs?
Absolutely. Yeah, we've got a couple down in Fullerton. We've got some others in the area. So for those of you who don't have an existing CPA relationship or attorney relationship, and you might not want to meet with us, but you want to use us more like ChatGPT or Google, we take no offense, and we would be happy to connect you with the people who assist you in your day-to-day. And before I get ushered off screen, any last-minute questions? All right. Thank you so much for listening to me ramble today. I hope this has been helpful. Everyone have a wonderful Sunday.
Just a reminder that Matthew and his dad, Rob, are assets of the church, so please, well, not in the formal sense that you talked about assets.
Please do not put me in your trust.
But they are resources for us to use. They're happy to help. They've been here for a long time. And also, just to remember that we're doing this as a community, right? There's a lot of other people around who have experience, so please talk with other people about these things. And all of us, remember, we're all trying to be faithful stewards of these things because they're not our own, right? Ultimately, they are all gifts from God. And ultimately, that day that we've been talking about, the day will come when each one of us will leave this earth to go be with our Lord. And all those things we have will no longer matter to us on that day. So let's be faithful stewards. All right, thank you guys very much. God bless you all. And we'll be here. What?
Closing prayer?
Oh, that's a good idea. Thank you. All right, let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the many blessings you've given us. We thank you for the many people you put around us with different gifts. Lord, help us to be faithful servants, using all that we have in honor of you and in obedience of you. So please bless each one of us with the time, treasures, and talents you give us. And Lord, be with us. Be with this place. We know that you provide every good thing. It's in your precious Son, Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. All right, and next week will there be Bible study? No. Because there will be how many services? And what time will it be at? Excellent work. All right. And we're ready.
And the cards are on the table in the courtyard, and then there's the sign-in sheet on just the silver one of these in the hallway. If just a few of you can sign in, that would be great. Thanks.